Hey everybody, this is Jeff. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Adding some of our production features back in and got to sync everything back up again. Still recovering from the great coffee fiasco where I dumped everything on the screen or on my computer and whacked everything up. So I had to go out and buy a bunch of new stuff and rebuild again. So, hey, look, thanks for coming on board. I am Jeff Colson. And this that I'm adding right now, Mike Bloom. Bloomer, how you doing, Mike?
I'm good, Jeff. Happy Monday. How are things over there?
Happy Monday. You know what? Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Just I'm ready to sue the NFL. I think that was I'm not a fan of either one of those teams. I'm not really a fan of the quarterbacks, the wide receivers. Yeah, there's nothing really there to grab for me. I just, part of me is being a Michigan guy. I'm a big Brady fan, and I'm in that post Brady depression that'll happen for till next year. But you know what? You don't wait to the last drive to the most important play of the game, literally the most important play of the game, to make a call like that, and basically screw a team out of a good overtime. I mean, that game really needed to be an overtime game, and that would have been fun. That would have been an unbelievable Super Bowl experience. Now it's tainted forever as being, it wasn't that. I mean, yes, you could see that call if it'd been that call all game long. You can't make that call if it's you haven't been calling it all night. You just don't randomly say, oh, we're going to get a touch foul just now. It's like, I don't know. I just completely am disenchanted with watching pro football. I'm a college football guy. I might take up watching one of those other games like polo, or I did actually flip through and see a polo match on TV this weekend. It was pretty cool. But I might take up that other sport where they wear the little safari hats, the white safari hats, and they run around with shin pads on and with white steward outfits like they're working on the Love Boat. What's that sport?
What is that sport?
They throw the ball and the other guy's got like a big mixer paddle that tries to whack it. What the hell is that sport?
Cricket?
Yeah, cricket. I might take up cricket now. There you go.
Very good.
Troy jumped in. Once again, somebody giving you help. There you go. Troy jumped in. All right, anyway.
You realize I can't see any of the comments. You got them on your side.
I know. I just threw it up. All right, so we got a lot of things to talk about. Tonight, first of all, I'm Jeff Colson, Mike Bloom. Been doing this for 35 years now, at all levels and all positions. NCAA coach, owner, general manager, junior owner, I should say. Level 5 certified. I've had a good experience with this. I love it. I'm passionate about this. Mike is about 22 years old, so he doesn't have that same depth, but he's pretty darn good at what he does. Mike, tell him a little bit about who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, definitely not 22 years old. I'm 41 years old, but I have been coaching for about
41 my
years.
ass.
Even though I got the Detroit Red Wings as my background here, I actually live in Chicago. I coach a U16 AA team and a U18 AA team. And then I also am the director of player personnel for the Lone Star Brahmas in the North American League. So unlike Jeff, who thinks he's the director of player development.
I was until you fired me and rehired me.
You're also a director of player personnel.
I just went off of what Elite Prospects said. For years, the Elite Prospects has said I was the director of, what was it? Development. So that's what I used. Yeah. I didn't even look at my own business card. I pulled one up. In fact, I got it right here. I pulled out the business card to look at it because I just hand these things out like candy and never once read them. So I actually did. And now as soon as I go to do this, of course, they're put back in a drawer. I'll find it before the broadcast is over. Anyway, I pulled out the business card, and you're right. You're right. So I'll get that corrected, and I'll start using the right title now from now on. Hey, a couple things. Tonight, we're going to look at goalies. We're going to talk about the unique path goalies take and how it's different and how it can be different. Now, even though some of you aren't goalies, thankfully. And most of you understand that you shouldn't be goalies because it takes a unique person and a unique set of parents to be a goalie. You need to watch this because you can still learn a lot from what we're doing. We're also, after that, we're going to get into I took one of my old slideshows from a lot of questions on Null. This week it's been, of course, it always happens when pre-draft comes up. What is the difference between being drafted? What's the difference between it being a tender? What are the numbers? What are the odds of each? So what I did was I brought this out. I'm going to try to put the slideshow up behind us with a picture-in-picture on a full screen. And if I can do that, we will watch that and work on it. Now, the reason I'm looking around is because it was on one of my screens, and now I just got to find it again. So anyway, let's start off with what we're going to talk about. After we say hi to a couple people. To say hi to a couple people, though, what we need to do is we need to use our production material and see if our production material works. Screw it. I'm not going to try that again. I already screwed it up once today, so we'll leave it at that. Let's say hi to some people. Not going to get into questions yet. We'll leave the questions till the end unless it's pertaining to the subject we're on. Hi, Tony from Colorado Springs is on. Tom from Rochester, Minnesota is on. Troy's on. Troy, thanks for coming in and helping with cricket. I'm not smart enough to know all those worldly sports. Which is better? We get this question every week. Which is better, USPTL Premier and all? Can you watch any video in the past 4 weeks? And I think that'll answer. But we'll jump on and try to handle that again. Casey from Amarillo's on. Dave Kennedy's on. Now, once again, Dave is unique. Why is Dave Kennedy unique? Dave Kennedy is a moderator on our discussion group for junior hockey advisor. I almost said family advisor. Wow. But Dave was the first person to join our discussion group several years ago. So good to see him on. Dave, thank you for everything you do for us. Troy from Connecticut's on. I think I already said that. Todd from Pittsburgh's on. And from Ohio, Liz is on from Ohio. This should be a good discussion. Well, I don't know why. Maybe because the picture that you put up on your ID, Liz, has a goalie on there. Maybe that's why you say this is going to be a good discussion. So, Mike, I'm going to start out. I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you have been around a long time, have heard me tell this story before, but here's how goalies, everything we talk about recruiting can happen for goalies, okay? It can happen for goalies, meaning, hey, you come through the system. We go out and scout and find you. We recruit you. We bring you in. We entice you with ice time, and we all the things that naturally happen or should happen in the recruiting process. It could definitely happen with goalies. However, before this show for 10, 12 years, I did another show on youth hockey, and it was on terrestrial radio. So we had it broadcast in Rochester, New York. We had it in Michigan, and it was picked up in different markets, Buffalo, and it was on real radio. And then you could get the podcast before really podcasting was in. We just had the MP3 files you could pick up through USA Hockey or local organizations put them on their website too. So many of you may remember that. Many of you don't. I know there's a few that actually are still on board from way back in the day on those. So we had a great show one night. We had Red Berenson on. For those that you don't know, Hall of Famer, University of Michigan coach forever, played for the St. Louis Blues. He actually set he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But Red Berenson was my coach at Michigan. Phenomenal guy. And had him on. He's in the waiting room, and he's going to do the show live. So we broadcast from Rochester. He was going to go to Ann Arbor, go into the studio, and talk, so it sounded better. So the studio is not that far from where he lives in Ann Arbor. Boom, he heads over to the studio. So while he's sitting there, we're interviewing one of the kids from our program that had a hot streak. I mean, this kid had a super hot streak. He went from U18 hockey and won a national title with Buffalo. Rochester kid, but played for Buffalo. Then jumped from there straight to, I think, the Steel. It was Chicago, yeah. So he jumped in with the Steel when the Steel were still in their infancy. And we were interviewing him about this, whirlwind trip he's on. And Red Berenson sitting there listening to him in his headset while he's getting ready for us to interview him next. Red Berenson gets off the interview, calls his assistant coach. His assistant coach drives to Chicago the next day, watches him practice, then stays around for the weekend, watches the game, and within 2 weeks, he's signed with Michigan with a full commitment. Now, that's unique enough, except for what I forgot to tell you was he was a junior in high school. Okay, so they advanced him through that summer, had him, take all the classes in the summer he needed to graduate. Then he graduated to jump in. Michigan had just lost their goalie to a starting position with Dallas. And when they lost their goalie to start with Dallas, this goalie came in and took his place right off the bat. Now, that's an unbelievable story. And it was all because of the interview that Red Berenson listened to. Red Berenson said there was something about him, this character, the way he was talking, the way he discussed himself and his teammates. And I was very, very impressed with him. Impressed enough that I wanted to see him right away. And boom, they've got their starting goalie for the next few years. Isn't that amazing? Red Berenson did not have him on his radar. Red Berenson did not have him, on any depth chart. He heard him on a radio show and went, you know what? I want to know what this kid's about. So you never know. You just don't know. Top that story. It's your turn. Your turn. I got another one, so I want to hear yours first.
Are we just sharing stories here? Or
well, you got to throw a story out. You got a good goalie story, don't you?
Well, I mean, I think in my role, still coaching, every year my goal is to try to advance players into junior hockey. And the reality is half of the kids that, are aging out of U18 are trying to get into these different junior leagues, and many of them can. And then when it gets to the goalies, because typically in juniors, these different junior programs are looking for an older player, it's a lot harder for kids to realize that there's going to be teammates of theirs that are moving on to levels that, because of their position, they're not ready to get moved into yet. And you have to try to navigate that conversation and whatnot, with the family and the kid. But it's hard for them to understand, even when they're really good. In some cases, if you're in 05 right now this year, and there's 2002 is the oldest level of junior, that's 3 years difference. And in some cases, depending on your birth date, it could almost be 4 years. So if you're playing at your birth year now, you're seeing your own age level. And there's definitely really high level players there, but there's still a difference between guys that are 20 years old and a kid that's 17 years old, as far as how they shoot and how fast the game is and different things like that. So a lot of these junior programs, they want the older goaltender because at least they're seeing their own birth year or younger as far as the competition that they see. So they're just going to perform better. So in some cases, goalies are stacked up where right now you might have an 02 and maybe two 02s, but maybe an 02 and an 03, and then there's an 05 as a third. And it's like, well, that kid's not necessarily getting a lot of action and whatnot. So again, part of this discussion is just to let goaltenders know that if you're not getting the opportunity that maybe some of your teammates are, or that you think you can actually play at right now today, that's not that you can never play there. You might just be a year or two early in where you're trying to go.
Fully agree. Let's go to the tape here. Let's throw up Elite Prospects. There it is. You and I are in the bottom. I'll move you over there, and we're going to look at something here. So we'll go to Elite Prospects. We'll jump down here to goalies, and we'll pull up the goaltender tab. All right, so now we got all the goalies listed, from top to bottom. So right now the graduating year is 02s. So let's go up to our goalie filter, or go up to the filter, and we're gonna make this easy. We're gonna just take goaltenders, and then we're going to, I know it flips back. I got to go back up every time when it does that. So we've got goaltenders, and what we want to look at right now is, let's not use that. Let's use birth year. Let's look at O2s. So 2002. Before I hit the button, let's get down and count how many goalies we have total on this. Any goalie that was rostered, 131, but you can see on the bottom of the list here, there's at least 10 goalies that have not played games. So let's say that number's around 120, and then it's a different varied amount of games that we've got. So 120 goalies that have been rostered this year that have actually played at least one game. Now let's look at that number when we apply that filter and see what it gives us for O2s. So now we're looking just at goalies. We're looking at just O2s. And that number is, let's go down the goalies. Sorry about that. Here's our goaltenders down here. Here's our goalie list, and that number now goes to 22, and then the less than 10 games, you get another 12. So what was the original number I gave you?
Well, you said 130 something, but it was really like 34 goalies that were,
I'll do it again, but keep this in mind. O2 goalies right now, there's 22 and 12. There's 34. The less than 10 games goalies, that we'll keep that in mind. 22 are actively playing in the league. Now we'll go up and
out of
we'll
28
look at
teams.
Yeah. So now we'll look at O3s, which I bet this number is going to be a little higher, because anytime you can get a goalie that can give you 2 years or 3 years, that's better. And now we look at that number, and the number is 20. Oh, I was good. It was bigger. It was 23.
Barely.
Okay. What's that?
I said just barely.
And I'm going to guess, I did not do this ahead of time. I'm going to guess if we go to O4s, it's going to be around that same number. So let's go into O4s. We'll apply it. We'll drop down to goalies, and up, not too far off. Not too far off. They list them all, even though you really got to stop that list. Well, actually, it's a little
bit higher.
Yeah, a little bit higher. So, okay. Oh, that's my less than 10 games. Here they are up there. Wow.
Nice.
It did drop off. So the 04 drop off this year is pretty high. That's statistically not been the case. It's usually, senior class is about 25%, 25%, meaning last year guys. Junior class, I use that because it's easier for people to understand than, redoing the birth years every year. Junior class is usually a little bit bigger, and then the sophomore class is usually just on the cusp. But we still have 20 games to go in the year. Maybe we'll see that number come up here. But now, here's where you can see the difference in the numbers, but, please be good for me. Please make me an honest man here. If I go to 05s and I pull up goalies, of actual goalies that have played, you got a couple. You got 2. Okay. And 06s, I don't even think there's an 06 that's suited up. But you don't need to go into that because you can see the drop-off with, so really the null is built for older goalies. The same thing Mike just said. All I did was statistically show it to you and show you that that's the way it works.
And that kind of works the same in the USHL, and it works similarly in the NCDC, and even in the NA3 and things like that. Like there's a reason why they go for older goaltenders, because they're just more equipped to be able to handle the workload. And that's important for families to know, because we'll get questions all the time. There was a question in our discussion group, and I think it was from an 07 goalie parent, or it could even have been an 08. I can't remember at this point, but that's still really young. Even if your player is a stud, there's so many other goalies that are older than him that, that are going to be playing in front of him, that some of those opportunities that you're trying to get early are not going to be available yet. And that's where the frustration comes, because sometimes the players, the forwards, the D, might be able to latch on to some of these opportunities, and the goalies have a little bit longer of a waiting period before they get to that same point. But it's not a dead end. It's not that they can't get there. It's they're not ready to be there yet based on what teams are looking for.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'm going to show you one more example here of a kid, and this is a goalie. Okay, so the goalie I'm looking at right now is an 01, so he left the league last year. This is Andrew Takix. Actually played with my son maybe at Amarillo, but what I want to show you is I want to show you his path. And I think this is kind of important to look at because you can see he came out of the Team Maryland program. That's fine. Did high school for a while there, then went to Gilmore, then jumped to the Maryland Black Bears, played a little bit there. Then he was at Odessa. Then he was in Amarillo. And if you notice, those first few years, he's getting bounced around, and he might have shared time, but he wasn't the number one. And then he gets to Amarillo, and he's still sharing games. That 25 means they're pretty much splitting the games, and I think he was the number two in that situation there. And I know he was the number two in Odessa, maybe even the number three, if I remember correctly. So this was not a clear path. I mean, even once he made it into the league, nobody had signed on that says this guy's going somewhere. Then all of a sudden he gets to his last year, and he is the number one guy. And boom, 42 games, takes him to the playoffs, and we all know what happened with the Titans last year. They had a pretty good run, and he did a really good job. He actually improved his goals against average in the playoffs, which is super hard to do. Goaltending in the playoffs is a valuable resource. But the only reason I bring him up is, he wasn't sitting on Colgate, for 4 years. He wasn't a early, and it's harder for a goalie to get an early college commit too. You might see some hot goalies that go to the National Development Program that are USHL guys that get an early commit, but you just don't see it very often. Goalies tend to, be somebody. Now, we have seen some. We had one last year that was an early commit, but it's not as common as it is with forwards. In fact, even in forwards, it's getting rarer to see a young kid committed. But and so I just wanted to show you Takix because he's the one that come top of mind that kind of showed that, you can bounce around a lot as a goalie. And there's some goalies that you'll see this bounce around from. I've seen goalies in one season, and I'll throw this back up. I've seen goalies easily in one season jump from, NCDC, CCHL, back to, maybe even a tier 3 team for a little bit, then bounce to the null and actually play, jump from tier 3 to a null team and actually play. You never know what the path is with goalies. Anyway, let's say hi to a couple more people, then we'll jump back in, Mike, with some more comments on this. Then we'll get rolling on to our next topic, which is going to be taking a little bit better look at the null. Okay, Junie's on. Junie, good to see you again. We've got Andrew's on from New Brunswick. Good insight. Thanks for some of the things you were saying last week, Andrew. It was helpful. And we got Hugh from Auburn, New York on. That's good to see you too. So we got some other new people back on, some new names, some non-new names, some veterans. Good to see. I want to say one thing about this, Mike. Unless you got something. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that, when you were talking about tactics, again, he dominated in his final year because he's playing against his own birth year or younger players. And that's when he ended up getting committed and he's moved on. And, the process kind of restarts now that he's a freshman in college. Again, he's going against much older kids, so he's going to have to readjust all of that.
Yeah, he's got a 2.67 goals against, but it's an 864 on his percentage, which is not so good, which means he's probably only gotten some partial games, and he's only got 2 games in.
But so he's still waiting his turn.
Yep, still got to go through the process. The freshman goalies, it's rare. But the thing I was going to say on this is, I've sat – remember what I say a lot about when you go to these showcases, you look for the black area, black shoes, black pants, black coats, in a clipboard in their hand. That's where all the scouts are. D1 guys especially, they like to that's their undercover look. Like nobody will know I'm a coach or a scout if I wear black on black on black on black to the rink. Nobody will figure that out, will they? So you go and you sit with these guys and you chat with them while they're looking at kids too, and you're looking at the same players. And this happened more than once, more than twice, maybe 3 or 4 times. Somebody will be scouting for a Division I team or a Division II team, and they'll see a goalie make a save, recover, make another save, and maybe it's 15 or 20 seconds of a flurry. Boom, 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 boom. And they go, wow, I want to talk to him. I'm going to go talk to him right after the game. And it's like, okay, yeah, he made a couple good saves, and they're serious. Their eye is looking for that guy that's quick reaction, athletic, fast, all those things. But they want to, they're looking for something specific, and it catches their eye quick. It may be all goalie scouts are that way. Now, since I'm a what do they call it, jack of all trades scout, meaning I gotta look at goalies and defense and forwards and look at different age groups. Maybe my eye isn't as good at this as their eye is, but if you're a forward or a D, you will not see that. You will not see a coach come in and go, wow, look at that guy. I'm going to talk to him today, and I'm going to probably offer him before the week's over. But I've seen it happen numerous times with goalies where somebody will walk in and watch him, and they go, boom, that's him. That's the guy I want. And then it's funny because if anybody else knows or heard that conversation, boom, 3 or 4 coaches might jump in line after that one guy, depending on how prestigious of the program he's with. And that's not uncommon. I mean, it doesn't happen every day, but enough that, over my period doing this stuff, I've seen it happen numerous times where a goalie just has one flurry, one day, one good showcase, one good game in a showcase, maybe one good period in a showcase. And somebody goes, wow, that's exactly what we need. And so I could score 3 goals in a game, 4 goals in a game as a defenseman or a forward. They're going to still want to see more of a battle-tested period of time, get to know me a little bit. And maybe I didn't think about this. Maybe they realize they don't really need to build that relationship with goalies like they do with forwards and D. Maybe they could do that because they go, we don't care. He's probably a 4.0 student because goalies usually have good grade points. And no stereotyping, but I truly believe that. I truly believe that. Now, and then they go, hey, he's going to be quirky anyway, so we got the quirkiness we're not worried about. He's going to have a good grade point, and he can play. Boom, done. What's next? So.
Yeah. And you also bring up a good point, too, when it comes to scouting. Like you talk about being a jack of all trades, and obviously goaltending is a position that we're still looking at and things like that. But we actually have a scout on staff that is more of a goalie scout, because it's such a specialized position that there's things that we just don't really look at or even understand, like what they're supposed to be doing in certain situations or how they're supposed to push off or, whatever the technical type stuff is. Myself, I'm not a great goalie evaluator. I can more tell you what I don't like in a goalie than when it comes to here's a grouping of players we like. Who's the best of the 15 that we have? That's where a little bit more specialized in what they do or how they handle their rebounds or, all those different things are coming into play when you're evaluating the best of the best. And that's where we need a little bit more of a specialized person that has played that role, works with goalies in that role, is up to date on all these different things, including our goalie coach, to have input on what they think of it. And that's not what we do for forwards or D. You know what I mean? Like, It's just a different position.
But I could tell you, apple doesn't fall far from the tree because we know she probably had a 4.0, our scout that does this, and she carries the quirky tag too. So that's the way them goalie people are. They like it. That's okay. Anyway, so what's the message we're sending here, folks? What's the message we're trying to say? Anybody? Crickets. Okay. I'm sure somebody will come on, but it'll be too late. Mike, what's the message what's the one thing we're trying to say?
It's just a longer path. So you got to be a little bit more patient. You got to understand that it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with your ability. In many cases, it has everything to do with your age. And
yep, that's true. Be patient. Thanks, Liz. That's why you got a goalie on your pitcher there. Liz knows what we're talking about. She's coming through strong for us. Appreciate it.
We need that. She gets it.
Uh, Kelly, the topic tonight, we're going to talk about goalies for a couple more minutes here, maybe not even, and then we're going to jump into explaining the composite roster for an all team and why things happen the way they do, because a lot of people don't. Okay, now we're going crazy. People are just jumping in left and right. Keep trying. Just take some time and good luck. That's true. I was a goalie. Way to go, Liz. I kind of figured so. What was your grade point, Liz? Guarantee you. You don't even have to tell me. I know what your grade point was. And then Kathy says, thank you, living it now. Hey, listen, there are exceptions to this. We're not saying that everything trends to be that, but, there's a good chance you can be a great goalie and play on, because if you're really good and you get hot during the season, you could be in the null, you could be in the USHL, you could be back in the null, okay? You could start off with an NCDC team, move up to the null, move up to the USHL, and then back to the null all in the same year. You just don't know what your path is going to take as a goalie. Goalies have a different style of getting there. So that's all we're saying. You might get that flash in the pan where one weekend you play really good and somebody grabs you, but you get it. You get the point. You understand. And did Liz give us a grade point average? I just wanted to know.
The other thing, too, that I think is important for us to share that I don't think people necessarily fully realize is when it comes to combines or pre-draft camps or main camps and things like that, normally when goalies sign up, they're automatically waitlisted. So, people sometimes – I actually got an email today from somebody saying that they had signed up for a camp and have been waitlisted. What does this mean? Type of deal. And, can you get me in type of deal? And it's like, they don't realize that, when any of these main camps or pre-draft camps or whatever, combines, whenever they first are released, we'll take our camp, for instance, we had over 50 goalies sign up.
Yep.
So if we're going to have 10 teams or 8 teams, that's over 5 goalies per team if we just let everybody in. So in most cases, everybody's going to be waitlisted. And then as we kind of have an idea of how many teams we're going to go forward with, that's when we start going through the different goalies who have registered. And then we're going to take, if we're going to have 10 teams, we're going to have 2 goalies per team. So we're going to look at who are the best 20 goalies for us to evaluate at that camp. And it's, you're going to have age, you're going to have ability, you're going to have where they're currently playing. All of those things are going to factor in on who of those 20 we're going to bring in. And that goes into the same decision making that any of these different combines or camps or whatever are going to have. And that's important, again, for people to know. If you have an 07 or an 06 and they don't end up getting into that camp, it honestly has nothing to do with their ability. There could be a bunch of 03s that are signed up that they're really looking at for an opportunity for their team for next season. And again, you just have to be patient.
Yeah, I think you hit it across the board there, and all the key points on that. I'm looking to find the my null presentation that I was going to share. So, Mike, entertain for a second while I find this.
Well, I did see you flashing Liz's GPA of a 3.8 while.
Yeah, I was actually I was disappointed. I was disappointed there. I was expecting a higher GPA from Liz there. 3.8.
Well, she's on a 3-point scale, so.
Well, if that's the case, that's fine. Or you never know. She may have had to walk to school 4 miles, 5 miles each way, and
right.
And carry her hockey bag with that goalie stuff. So, that could put you way behind. Let's see if I've got it here. I'm gonna try this one. Okay, here she goes. She's got a brag now.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
Yep, I got a brag. Okay, so that's not it. But Mike, you're supposed to be entertaining right now while I find the right presentation here.
I can't say I was never close to a 3.8. I was, if I could hit a 2.8, we would have been excited. That's why I ended up at Western Michigan.
I hear that's a good high school.
Nice.
From what I hear, I might not know everything about it.
I never made it to class.
You never went to school?
I mean, I graduated from there, but I don't know how often I showed up.
Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to really put the pressure on you. Boom. You got control now for 30 seconds while I find this. Go ahead, talk away.
All right. Well, I'm glad you invited me onto your show for me to take the lead on it. But you know, I'll just go back to the topic that we're talking about with goaltenders, and it's something that you want to try to get your player exposed to these different higher level camps and things like that, because like I said earlier, when they're used to going against kids of their own age, there's going to definitely be kids that can fire the puck and things like that. But there's such a difference between if you're playing U15 or U16 right now, even if they jumped up and played U18. But now picture them jumping into the USHL or jumping into the NOL and understanding just how much different those shots come off the stick. Tracking the puck is a little bit different. You know, the way they battle in front of the net is different. They're heavier, they're more competitive for loose pucks. You know, they're getting into those shot lanes better. They've got more courage the older that they get. The everything changes. So it's hard to fully list all the different things that are different that a goalie is going to have to experience.
Hey, I found it.
Okay, you want me to just cut me off? See, that's not polite. That's not polite. You should know that as the host.
Well, you're tap dancing, man. I was waiting for the cane and the top hat to come out there. All right, good. Can we move on?
As long as you're ready on your end, you got all the controls.
I think I am. All right, let's give it a shot. What I want to do is just give go through this real quick. This is a roster breakdown. Now, this was done maybe 1920 or 2021 season, so it's a couple years old, but you'll get the idea. And the numbers are swinging back to, pre-pandemic numbers as far as statistics go. Every season we get a little bit better on getting back. We had that real bad run there. So let's just look at this and talk about it as we go through. And now I just got to see how I'm going to make this slide. Oh, I got to make it play. Okay. There we go. Maybe. All right, so we'll talk about the draft first. Roster breakdown. Let's just talk about the roster first. Returners, tenders, draft picks, free agents, and affiliates. Okay, not only is that where the roster comes from, this is where you build your roster from, and this could be other leagues too. We're just using the null because I happen to have this ready to go. But you see between returners, which are the guys that played for you last year, the next in line is tenders. Now, remember, nobody going into main camp has a guarantee. Now, returners, the coach might pull them aside and say, hey, you're all set. Just go out there and work hard, especially if a kid's a captain or something. But, there's a lot of times where a returner with a good class of incoming players might not have a spot. If a team's returning 10 or 15 players, there might be 2 or 3 kids that don't – you're not guaranteed anything. That's my point. You're not guaranteed anything as a tender. You come into camp, there will be tenders on every single team this year. When I say that, somebody's going to look it up and there'll be an anomaly. But don't make the team. 10 come in, 9, 8, 7 make the team. Draft picks the same way. Free agents, now that's the interesting one, and we'll talk about that in a little bit because free agents are very important, and a lot of people don't understand that that's a big component of most teams not only in the NOL, but in the USHL too. And then affiliates, that's your young players, your 16s and 18s that skated with you during the year, and maybe you don't have to tender them, and maybe you don't want to tender them, but they come into camp and they actually impress you enough to make the team. So that's where the roster breakdown comes from. And now it all funnels, okay? It funnels from you could put pre-draft up there. Remember, pre-draft, you probably aren't going to see your tenders. You're probably not going to see your returning players. I think we had one. Did we have one player that was a returner skated pre-draft last year?
Yeah, we had a couple.
Okay.
And then we also had a couple of our NA3 players that did the pre-draft also.
Right. But you see this funnels. Main camp, you still got a lot of guys. You got all those guys, and, main camps are different from different teams, or they differ team to team. But main camp could be 4, 6, 8 teams of players that you're cutting down to build your summer roster. Okay, and I'll explain the summer roster in a second. But that main camp to that summer roster preseason, and then from there you get on the roster for the fall as they trim down, and then from that you go into the final roster, which means first 2 weeks of September, right around when Blaine happens. That's when you might actually have a couple games under your belt, and then they trim to the 23 roster. So that kind of gives you an idea on the funnel. Just because you made, you're drafted, you could be the first kid drafted, but in reality, you might be the 11th draft pick on the team if you count the tenders as a draft pick. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but the reality is the team's already picked players before they get to the draft. They've already selected players and locked some players in before they got to the draft. And there's a lot of reasons why. Maybe they didn't tender you because you weren't interested in being tendered. Maybe you're coming from a league, or you're coming from there's a lot of things. And a lot of times you'll see draft picks in the null that are, let's say, hopeful. Would you say it that way, Mike? Where you see a kid that's in the BCHL, you see a kid in the USHL, and you're thinking he might not stay there, so you draft him just in case he's going to leave that league.
Yeah, swings. Taking a swing at a player.
Yeah. Or if you're in sales, it's called whale hunting, where you're going to go out and try to get the big one, So, okay, main camp, you have to come out of there at 35. Preseason, you can go in, 25 to 28 is where they're going to make the first, cut down to. They're going to start thinning out a little bit. The roster goes to 23. So the final roster cut goes to 23. So the drafts. I'll read this quickly. Usually held in June. Draft order is set by the regular season play from the year before. So if you're the first team overall in the null, you're drafting last. The only exception to this rule is they invert the order. So whoever's in last place overall of all the teams, they get the first pick, unless new teams come in. And I'm assuming that Rochester, being the new team this year, is going to be put up to the top of the list or close to the top of the list. I haven't heard anything or seen anything in writing yet on that, but that's pretty much the norm. Would you agree on that, Mike?
Yeah.
And then once in a while, for wacky things, they'll throw a supplemental draft in. We saw a supplemental draft 3 years ago, I think. What's that?
Through COVID, we had the supplemental.
Yeah, because a couple teams dropped out because of COVID, and when that happened, there was a supplemental draft. So,
the timing of the league was all screwed up too, from what we were starting to what the other junior teams were starting. So it gave us a head start on, acquiring assets for the next season.
So now the draft. The draft is not the draft is it's the equilibrium, meaning if there's an equation, I'm going to go through that in a second, but there's usually, and I say usually because the draft, it literally could be 5 rounds, 6 rounds, 7 rounds. There is no pattern that says it has to be, or there's no rigidity to this that says it has to be 15 rounds or 17 rounds. And I'll explain why in a second here. It's virtual, meaning it's all done, on everybody's sitting in their office or a conference room. And, for example, our staff is on a Zoom call together. We're all on one call, and we talk throughout the whole process. We rearrange our board every time a pick comes off. It's just like you see on TV for the pro sports,
It's like if you are playing fantasy baseball or football and you log into ESPN for your draft time, and you're able to communicate with the other people in the league and you see who's being selected.
Yep.
It's a different platform, but that's anyone who's played fantasy sports, it's exactly the same.
Yep. So here's the maximum summer protected list. It's 35. So to figure out what the draft is, the draft pick is equal to your 35. That means your protected players, which is returners plus tenders. So if I have 15 returners and 10 tenders, That's 25. That means I'm going to draft 5 rounds. Okay. Now, there is a little bit of nuance to this because tenders can be traded. Tenders can be used for compensation for players. You may have less tenders. So, but just remember this: you're going to take your returners and your tenders and add them up, and then you're going to subtract that from 35. That's going to give you how many draft rounds a team has. So, you might look at a team and say, "I really want to play for X, and I hope they draft me." Well, they might only have 3 or 4 picks. They may not have many picks in that, and then there's other teams that will have. There's going to be teams this year. There's always at least 2 teams, 2 teams that have 3 or 4 picks more than everybody else, where everybody's done and they're still going, and you'll see that every year. Anything to add to that, Mike?
If you're following along, I get this a lot. People will follow along with the draft, and again, to your point, if they have a team that they've really been talking to and they're hoping that team drafts them, and then all of a sudden they see that team come up for a pick and it says pass. And then it comes up the next round, it says pass. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe they didn't draft me. They said they would, or, we had such good conversations. Why aren't they taking me? They're just passing, and they just don't realize that they've only had a limited amount because it got them to that full 35 or whatever that number is, and they can't draft anymore.
So here's just a quick analysis of this. And once again, it's a couple years old, but the trends stay pretty true to the lines. 104 drafted players played at least 1 game. So we're talking about players that actually were on the draft board. They got drafted by a team. 104 of those players, played at least 1 game. I should have actually, what I don't have is how many total players were pulled. Maybe you can jump on Elite Prospects and look at the draft for 2020, Mike, while I'm doing this, and figure out how many. 58 players played at least 30-plus games, and 19 players pretty much played the whole year. So you get a lot of guys that start the year from that draft process, but even drafts, it doesn't matter how you come into this league. It's a hard league to stay in. It's a hard league to make, and it's a hard league to stay in. So you're going to, 1 in 5 of the players. Now, remember, this is of the players that played at least 1 game. 1 in 5 made it to play the whole year. Now, I got to imagine the number for the actual drafts. If every team got on average 10 rounds, I would imagine that number is going to be around 300 total players. What did it come up to, Mike?
Let's see. I would say 300 is probably more 250.
Okay. Still, you're 250 to 104 to get you into at least 1 game. 30 games, 58 players, and then down to 19. You can see that the draft process, and this is no different than if you're a football player being drafted, if you're drafted in the NHL, if you're drafted into basketball, whatever it is, there's only, hockey, they got a short bench. There's a short amount of players. It's not football where you got 65 players. And even there's only so many of the draft picks that actually make the team. Here, it's the same thing. So, keep that in mind as you go through this process. You might be drafted. You might do really well. You might actually get a few games in, and then you're cut. That happens, and you can be sent back to U18s. It's your choice. You're not sent anywhere. You could be traded, but most of the time, if you're young, maybe the coach talks to you and says, "Hey, look, we got you up. We got you a few games, 1, 5, 10. We don't really think you're quite ready. Let's get back to U18s and develop a little bit more, and we'll bring you back next year." Or sometimes they just don't like you, and they say, "That's it." Some teams in the NAL will just go, "Hey, you gave it a good shot. Thank you very much," and they don't give you any open crack of a door to come back to the program. So, anything on that, Mike?
Well, I would just say that some things that end up happening with players is either they've been tendered, and sometimes they've been tendered earlier in the year, or once they've been drafted, they don't put in the work. And then when they actually show up to the main camp, it's like, oh my God, what happened to this player? They basically took for granted that they were going to have a spot. They didn't put in the type of work that they should have throughout the off season. And some of these other players, whether it was they didn't get drafted, they did not get tendered, so they were super hungry. to like do whatever they could to develop their skating or their shot or, get stronger, get faster, whatever it was that they were deficient in that may have caused them to not get an opportunity.
Yep.
They went all in the off season and they showed up to main camp and they were passing up these players that maybe at November of the last year when they got tendered, were taking everything for granted and maybe got a little bit heavier or just didn't do what they needed to.
And
That
hopefully
is
it's a
something
good.
you see a lot.
And when they do that, hopefully it's a good lesson, because that happens with a lot of good players. They walk in the locker room for the next practice with their team, and they've got that shit-eating grin on their face, and they're just slowly taping their stick, and maybe they're sitting back with their skates untied for a little bit, just soaking it all in because they know everybody's looking at them because they just got their tender out of the way. And then, bang, what's really embarrassing is when that player comes back the next fall and has to get in the locker room with all those guys again after he got sent back down because he only lasted 3 games. So it happens. It is the way it is, and you got to deal with it. But
Yep.
I was going to show you. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay, looking at another way to look at this is the null draft. If you've got 1 year left, this is that percentage I was talking about. We did it with goalies. Once again, goalies won't trend like this, but you can see the draft. If you got 1 year left, 22% of the draft picks go for the players that are in their last year. 36% of those have 2 years left. 32% of those have 3 years left. So if you're next year, if you've got 2 years that year and the year after of eligibility, or you're a 3-year player and you're good, that's 68% of the league. That's where the draft picks sit. Now look at the last two. If you're 4 years away from being done with juniors, so right now that would be what? 01's the last year. So if you're in 06 right now, 1%. Yeah, but I'm working it back. If you got this year, since 02s are in their last year, right?
Yes.
Okay. So add 4 years to that. So an 06 would be a player with 4 years left. You got 1% chance to be in the null. And if you've got 5 years left, so if you're in 07, less than 1%. I mean, you'll get a handful, maybe a couple, and they get games in. They get a game or two, and those are not roster picks whatsoever. So you can see where the weighting is. 58% of the league is in their first or in their last year or second to last year. That's just the league.
So
it's an older league.
Those numbers will be for this next draft. The 03s will be considered the 22% in their last year. The 04s would be 2 years out. 05s 3 years out. 06s 4 years out. So, again, just putting that out there for people to kind of have an understanding, because you get a lot of disappointment. Like, I had kids that were 05s on my team last year, and I'm at a AA organization that thought that they were going to get drafted into the North American League because they went to these different camps or combines, and they didn't, and they were like all dejected and defeated. And it's like, even if you were a AAA player, the chances of you getting drafted as an 05 are so slim that your mindset is just not correct. Like, you shouldn't be this upset over it. This was bound to happen, regardless of what level you were playing at.
Yeah, and the important thing to know is a ton of last year U18 players make it into the draft. I don't think I put that number in here, but that a lot of people get afraid. Well, I don't want to go back for my last year of U18. It still gives you 2 years of junior eligibility, as it's supposed to be. It's designed for you to play throughout your U18 year, even though guys jump early. But you still, a lot of those guys need that last year and actually come out stronger and move into a role that's better when they play that last year of U18 because they get ice time. Let's face it. Would you rather be on a team that dresses 21 but has 25 players or 23 players protected, which means they probably have some others because affiliates come in, players come in for the weekend, injuries. There could be 25 or 26 guys that are on the team in the locker room. Or do you want to be on a team that's got 18 forwards and 2 goalies, or 18 players, meaning forwards and D, 18 players and 2 goalies? To me, and usually U18 because of injuries. What are you running? Usually 5D and 3 lines. When I coached U18, that was about it. Even though I had more, with injuries and other things that come up. So anyway, in the 2019-20 season, teams with 5 or more drafted players on the roster, this is it. These are the guys that had 5 or more drafted players. So you can see at the time, if you look at where they were in the rankings, except for Lone Star, interesting, Lone Star, that was the anomaly. Look at everybody else. They were in the bottom of the league. So a lot of times if you're a drafted player, teams that there's 2 reasons why you're in the bottom of the league. One is because you had so many older kids the year before, maybe you were strong the year before, they all leave, or it's a poor team. I'm not going to tell you what I think about these here, but I will tell you this. Maryland was new, Maine was new, and New Mexico was new. And Springfield just moved to Springfield. I can't remember. Anyway, most of those were new franchises or very close to being new franchises. Am I correct on that, Mike?
Aside from Springfield, they've been there for forever.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong on that one. I am wrong on that one. But the bottom line is large draft picks making the roster with 5 or more. Usually it's a team that's on the bottom. Lone Star just has a habit of always playing draft picks and getting draft picks in the lineup. So, all right, this is the best class. I'm not going to get into that. So, NA3HL, let's just talk about this a little bit because some people don't understand this. Requirements. Every NOL team has a requirement to draft out of the NA3HL. So it does give you a leg up. It does get you in the door. It does get you into main camp. And a lot of times it gets you into the beginning of the season. You'll see a lot of NOL teams with NA3 players at the beginning of the year. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stay there. Statistically, the reality is you're not going to make it statistically. That's just the reality of this. Now, there are teams that do a good job of always trying to get NOL guys or NA3HL guys under the NOL team. For example, I think we've been consistent for how many years now, Mike, as far as having an NA3 presence?
As long as I've been there. So
you've been there 6 seasons, right?
6 seasons, yeah.
Yeah, so in the last 6 years, there's at least one team we know of that consistently keeps NA3 players on the roster. Now, not every team does a good job of this. Not every team has NA3 teams underneath them that they own. That has a lot to do with it. But just know the reality. It will get you there, and if you think you're good enough, playing NA3 will get you an open door if you're good and you stand out in that league. The consistency of staying there, though, now that's the tougher part because everybody, here's the thing. Don't let anybody fool you. People will say, oh, the top team in the NA3 or the top team in the USPHL Premier or the top team in the EHL can win games in the NOL. Okay? Well, I just vehemently disagree with that because that would mean that you would have to have players that are leading goal scorers that come into the NOL and become leading goal scorers, starting goalies, and top defensemen right away. And that usually doesn't happen. You'll get a couple. There'll be a couple, but there is a huge difference between the 2 leagues. So you could be on the best team in the NA3. There is no comparison between the 2 leagues. It's not one step, it's a 2-step up from the NA3 or any Tier 3 to a Tier 2 team. It is a difficult jump to make. And I see some questions come in, and we'll get to our questions here in a second. So Tier 3 comparison, Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just say that there are definitely programs in the NA3 that there's multiple players off that roster that end up moving into the North American League. And, if we look at the Brahmas, we just talked about they got the same ownership group and they play out of the same rink. But that doesn't mean that only the Texas Junior Brahma 3HL players can play for the Brahmas. Like, if the Brahmas don't select a player to play on their team at the NA level, we had players playing for Amarillo, and they go off to other teams in the NA because they can latch on to those programs.
Yep.
So there are upward mobility opportunities for kids in the 3HL even outside of the program at the Null that they're affiliated with, that typically happens. So you'll see the Rochesters of the world and, Granite City or some of the teams that have top NA3 programs. A lot of their players are the ones that'll end up getting drafted and end up sticking in the North American League. It just may not be with that program that they're, directly affiliated with.
Yep.
It's just a different team in the league.
So remember, every NAHL team, every Null team has at least one tendered player and one drafted player to start off with from their summer roster, okay? So that's 2 times 30 teams. That's 60 kids, but what the reality is you can pick up more. And Mike, tell them how teams get more picks from the NA3HL ranks.
Well, you can get more tenders from the NA3 by, there's different events that are held throughout the year that these different coaches and scouts have to participate in going to scout. And then because you're at these different events, you acquire more assets within that league or that level. Same can be said for the NAPHL, same as, for the 3HL. If your program are going to these different events, you're going to get an additional asset.
Yeah, so if you make sure your scouts are at events, you're going to get more picks. So why is there 67 players versus 60? It's because some teams had more picks, and to be honest with you, some of these kids made it as free agents. They just showed up and made the team without being a draft pick and without being a tender. Maybe they went to a different organization. So
the other option you get too, where you can acquire more assets, is if you're a program that has the 3HL kids come out and skate with your North American League team. So if you have players that are consistently getting out there and practicing or even playing in some games, because you're using that as a ladder of development, the league is going to reward you with another asset that you can
absolutely
use.
So using the same kind of matrix as we used earlier with the whole picture of new guys coming in through the draft, this is guys coming out of the 3HL. 67 players had 1 game, 34 players had 10-plus game, 19 players had 40-plus games. So that gives you a little bit of a, once again, a breakdown. 1 in 3, maybe a little bit less than 1 in 3, will actually get a full season or close to a full season in. Players drafted over 40-plus games with the other leagues. So USPHL Premier, 27 players were drafted there. 5 players had 40-plus games. EHL, 18 players were drafted. Now, this is 1 year. It was back a couple slides. I think this is 2019-20. EHL, 18 players drafted, 2 with 40-plus games. NCDC, 74 drafted, 23 had 40-plus games. So you asked the question, Junie, about NCDC's role. That also tells you, it's difficult to come from any league. It's just difficult to come in to the league. The NCDC's numbers are bigger, but proportionally, it's still 1 in 3 kids make it and stay. And they'll end up going back to the NCDC or maybe to a Canadian Junior League after that. So, Mike, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think we do use the NCDC as a tool to try to find players to bring into our league. So between the options you have on the slide, that's the one we would recruit more heavily because they're, we've talked about it on other podcasts that we've had. There's some studs that are still playing in the NCDC because they're local to the New England area. Yep. And they stay because they're just not USHL ability, but they end up realizing, hey, I don't have a commitment. So I do now consider myself wanting to go to the North American League because I need to get committed, and I'm not quite getting that same vibe in the NCDC or same, conversation, and I got to get over there so I can get my commitment. So you see a lot of teams pulling kids that have played in the NCDC for a few years and still haven't been committed that are looking for it in their last year.
And we're not going to get into that full discussion tonight, but one of the things about it is, why would a guy that's playing in the NCDC feel compelled to go to the NAL? Once again, 10, 12 players a year. That's statistically, if you come into the league without a commitment at the beginning of the season, the NCDC only has 8, 10, 12 players with fresh commits every year. We'll see how it works this year, but it looks like it's trending the same way it's always trended or since they've been around. So going back to this, it says 18 and 16s, but really think about it, U18. It's the largest pool of drafted players, the U18s. That's where, if you're concerned, that's where still the most draft picks are utilized. They're utilized on U18 players. Okay, the trend here, I did put on the bottom there, U16 numbers drafted, that number doubled in after the last year, and there was a trend showing U16. It looked like we were getting younger a little bit. Then this whole pandemic slowed that younger down, and there's a reason why. Because the pandemic offered NCAA players a free year of eligibility. So now, instead of having 4 years of eligibility, you had 5. They made a backlog. So a lot of kids that right during the pandemic, if you were a 2000 birth year, they literally, there was 70 to 90 kids. They were either just told they don't have a commitment anymore because that senior is going to stick around for one more year. That junior is going to stick around for one more year. Or they're told they had to wait a year, which put pressure on the 01s. So now the 01s, maybe they don't have a commitment or their commitment arrangement changed. Then it pushes down to the 02s. So we're not out of this yet, but we're not seeing that trend towards U16 players, that number growing like it was going to become a younger league like pre-pandemic. So throw that out the window. One thing that has stayed the same is when we look at the Canadian side. The trend is away from Canadian players, but not Canadian leagues. You're looking at Americans playing in Canada or even Europeans playing in Canada over the Canadians only because, there is players coming out of those leagues. It's expensive to take a Canadian player, 3-4 times more expensive than it is to pay for the rights for a European player. An American, there's no fee because they're American. They can come back and play at any time. So even in a good year, 7% of the null is Canadian, but the leagues are still extremely important. All those leagues kick out a lot of players, both Canadian and Americans, that move on to play in the null. Did a separate video on that. It's called the NAHL Secret Weapon, and it talks about the CJHL, what leagues, what teams do a really good job. You might want to watch that video. It is up on our YouTube page. Canadians, only 4 in the first round. This is for that one specific year. 10 different leagues. Think about that. 10 different leagues represented. That's because some of the kids were being drafted out of like the Gojo or some of the British Columbia Junior B leagues. It's a significant decrease. And I put right in there the border and the BCHL concerns. Less emphasis on going up there as a coach or a scout. If you're an American scout, to go up to I didn't go up the last 2 years because I didn't want to get caught up there, nor did I want to get to the border and find out that I'm not eligible to go in. There was just too much of a risk to travel up there. That's pretty much gone, but it was there. Only 15 teams drafted a Canadian, and once again, it's a cost of a Canadian player. That's one of the reasons why it's a little bit of a detriment. So BCHL, I'm not going to get into the BCHL numbers tonight. And just real quick, Mike, give me your thoughts. Which is more important, tender or draft, or does it matter to you?
Well, I think the tender is the most coveted because that's a program and a player agreeing that this is where they want to play. A draft, if you're not tendered and the draft comes, any team can draft you, whether they're a good program, a bad program, if they're geographically where you'd want to play or not, you have no control over that. A tender, right. You have control to some extent. If the program you want to play for is also interested in you tender and now you're out of the draft. You don't have to worry about where you're playing next. Both parties have agreed that this is the place for you.
So fully agree. Yeah. Once again, don't get hung up on tender or draft because tender or draft or free agent. If you do what you do and you do it right and you do it at main camp, and then you continue that over into the fall. If you bring what you can bring and you think you're an all-level player, it doesn't matter what else is on the ice. You don't need a title that says tender or draft. I can tell you right now, Whoever's watching the main camp, once everybody's out there in main camp, it doesn't matter who is a returner. It doesn't matter who's a draft pick. It doesn't matter who's a tender. You're looking for fire in the belly, and you're looking for guys that want to run through brick walls. And if you bring that, then you have an opportunity to make it into the null. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Let's jump into a few questions. This one's sitting out there.
I would say the more interesting question outside of what would you rather be, a tender or a draft pick? I would say the more interesting question is, what would you rather be, a draft pick or a free agent? Because a free agent, you still can choose which camp you want to attend, and you have a little bit more control.
You actually do have more control as a free agent, where you can maybe go to 2 or 3 camps and line them up the way you want to play it out as a chess match. And if you're absolutely right that you do have more control as a free agent. Now, here's one thing we didn't talk about. And you can go on to the null site. You can go on to the Elite Prospect site. If you look at the numbers, you'll go, wow, that kid was a 3rd round USHL player. Why was he a 9th round draft pick? Or you might see a kid and you go, wow, that kid scored 70 goals in Tier 1 Elite. Why is he a 12th round pick? Okay, first of all, throw the rounds out the window, because they mean less here than they do in other leagues like a pro league. You don't get paid more money. There's no incentive. What you'll see is a lot of times, if you're going to take a chance on that home run hit, like Mike called it, or the whale, like I called it, they're coming from the BCHL. You see a kid that you think might be dropping down because maybe he didn't get the ice time. Maybe it's not a good fit for him. He wants to play closer to home, whatever. So he's going to come to the null. They might be a last round draft pick. They might be a last round pick. Now, usually the trend is that the last rounds are where your NA3 kids are coming from, and usually a team will wait for their last round or the second to last round to pick, because they know who they've got. There's not a lot of people that are pressing for them. But don't worry about those numbers in between. Maybe the first pick means something because it's kind of an honor to be the first pick. But after the first pick, it really doesn't matter. And there's not an emphasis for most teams. Maybe some are out there. I don't want to speak for everybody in the null, but for most coaches, once you're drafted, you're drafted. It doesn't matter if you went in the 4th round, the 9th round, or wherever you went. So do you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, I think every team has a strategy, and it's not always we're going to take the very best player on our board first. If they think that they can get that player in the 5th round rather than the 1st round, and there's a couple other players that maybe they want to take a swing and hedge their bets that maybe that kid's not going to go back to the BC League, or they're playing in the USHL now, but they might not stick, so we want their rights type of deal. You could either draft those kids early or you could draft them late. Like, there's a strategy on how teams do that. So the rounds don't really mean anything.
Let's say a team has a Swedish player that they fell in love with, and they think he's going to be their best player. They might not draft him to the 4th or 5th round because nobody knows about him. Or maybe he's from another country outside of the U.S. and Canada. And the kid hasn't talked to anybody else. There hasn't been anybody scouting him. But this team knows about him. They might take a couple chances on other guys and see if they can pick up some good talent and grab somebody first before they actually pick their best player. So don't get hung up on that number. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, a coach may have a good relationship with a kid who's playing in the USHL, or an advisor, and that player is not going to stick in the USHL, but no other program knows that. Yep. So you may take them later because no one else is going to, or maybe you take them earlier because everybody knows that player is going to drop. So there's strategy involved. To your point, don't get lost in the round that people are selected. There's definitely gamesmanship going on.
So somebody throws up the question, how old does one need to start thinking about getting an advisor? Look, I got tons of videos out there on advisors. Not really the topic tonight, but I'll give you the short answer. When you need an advisor. Not everybody needs an advisor. The first thing is to make the decision on, do you need an advisor or not? If you're playing high-powered teams, you're on a highly exposed team, you've got a coach, a U18 coach, U16 coach, that's pressing the flesh with a lot of junior people and some college people, yeah, you might not need it because things could fall in place for you. If they're not falling in place, well, then you start to thinking about what type of advisor for your unique situation. It's not always the answer. Advisors may be the answer, but you look on any team, 30, 40, 50%, 70% of kids coming off of really good teams don't have advisors, depending on which team you're on and how prestigious it is with the parents, because that's a lot of it. Oh, we have an advisor. Don't fall into that trap either. You don't need an advisor all the time, but when you do, make sure you hire the right advisor for the situation. Oh, somebody asked how Adam's doing. That's my son. For those that don't know, he had both shoulder surgery and back surgery coming out of his last year of juniors. Made it through 2 years of college, and just finally this last semester hung him up and is transferring to the University of Michigan. So thanks for asking. He's doing fine. He's kept his 4.0 grade point up, and but hockey is going to be in a different role now, and the priority is not the same as it was when he came out of juniors, playing for Shreveport, which is not Lone Star, but he had a wonderful experience coming out of there with the Robertson Cup. But he's moving on. So thank you so much for asking. Appreciate that. Let's see. I know we had a few other questions here. Let's see if we can jump on them. Late crowd came in too. I see a lot of people coming on. Okay, here we go. Here's what I saw. Suns USPHL team wants a commitment with a deposit soon. He has 2 null main camp invites. One is a contract and deposit. First part of the question is a contract and deposit normal for this time of year? And should he wait to attend a null main camp? He's 18 years old and he's a high school senior. So his timing's right. That's the time you want to start thinking about this. Is he going to make the move? I don't. For me, Mike might think differently, but I look at things this way. If you got a chance to play in the null, you take that chance and you go to the camp. And if a coach wants to lock you down, if he thinks you're a quality player, he should not be standing in your way. That should be an open conversation, and that's something you have to read with this coach. But when I was coaching at Tier 3, if a player came to me and said, hey, I've got a chance to go to a null camp, have at it, buddy. Good luck. And, we know you got a home. We'd love to have you back. And as soon as you find out, please let me know either way. But if it doesn't work out, we'd love to have you here and we'd love to have you stay. Even if you get 5, 10, 20 games up there and they decide that it's not a good fit for you, you got a home here. Now, that's the answer that most good coaches will give. They're not going to stand in your way. But it's very competitive at Tier 3, and coaches don't always see things the same way. And there are coaches out there that can get petty. So, make sure you read the tea leaves before you go in there, guns a-blazing. But I know the majority of good coaches don't want to ever step in your way to see you move up and have an opportunity. And if you got a chance to make that move, that's the way I see it. Mike, anything?
I would just say make sure if the null is your goal, do not sign anything when it comes to the USPHL because there's a lot of people that can't get out of the money that will be due.
Yeah, the financial commitment.
League. If you decide to actually take advantage of a North American League opportunity because you made a team. Right. Not every program, and you don't have to blast whatever program you're with, and I won't blast any of the programs that are out there. There's only 70 or so that are out there, but some of them will not let you out of your contract. So do not sign anything if you have a good relationship with them and if they understand that the null is a higher level. They should be excited for you to try that opportunity. And if it doesn't pan out this year, then it's a good situation for you to go back to. They shouldn't be pressuring you to pay anything or sign anything at this point.
Tell them Bloomer sent you, and tell them if they have any problems to call Bloomer, and he'll take care of it.
But legally, I can't. So if you sign anything, that's on you.
Junie asked the question, could the Null ever become a Tier 1 organization? Mike, take that one.
I don't think they want to be. I think they understand their level, and the USHL does a great job with the level that they're at. And there's differences between the leagues, and there's a trickle down and a trickle up, or I guess it's not a trickle up, but there's that ladder of development that they want. They got guys that come down from the USHL, and then the NA pushes guys up, and it's a really good development model, and it's everybody's slotted where they need to be. I think the colleges understand the levels, and they understand where these players are within each league, and it just makes it a little bit more simple. I will say, if you were tracking the USHL in the null back when I played, and even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was, the null used to actually be the better league, had the better players, the more highly skilled players than the USHL did. And I'm not even sure, Jeff, you would probably know when that switch occurred, but it's in the shorter term, and as far as when that actually happened.
Yeah, they only came up with the distinction of the tier 1 and tier 2 less than 15 years ago is when that distinction was made. Tier 1 and tier 2, there used to be junior A, junior B, junior C, junior D, and then it changed to a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 model. Now, when they first did it, when USA Hockey first came out with that model, they argued for several years that was only the financial categories of the teams, because remember, you still had a full pay EJHL league out there that was competing with the NOL, and it was very upset when they went to tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So there was many reasons why that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 came into play. But the NOL at one point was, they had the National Development Program playing with them in their league. And I don't know if they necessarily were head-to-head competing, because they weren't on the same financial model. The vetting for USHL teams is that the bar is much higher financially to get into a USHL team than it is to get into an all team. So you have a different type of owner. You have a different level of owner as far as their wealth and the amount of money they can put in, their cash flow. It's different. So I think it's 10, 15 years is where that number is, where it started really, being crystallized. And I think it's very crystal clear now where all the leagues fall into play. Where, even though the USPHL does some things that don't always seem to make sense to the rest of the world, like having a coast-to-coast league with, 148 teams or whatever the number is on their Premier League. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and almost virtually getting rid of their elite level, because no team wants to be called elite when there's Premier. So, you got it just – that model, to me, I struggle with it at times. I was an owner in that league, and I struggled with it when the NCDC model came into play, and that's when we decided to go a different direction. But to be honest with you, I think the null's where it's going to be, and it's going to stay the way it is. Now, it's the one thing in hockey, and especially with juniors, every 5 to 6 years something happens where you go, wow, didn't see that one coming. Because what will happen here is that sooner or later, my prediction is sooner or later the USPHL Premier will get tired of being a part of the NCDC in that whole USPHL model, and the Minnesotas will break off, or the Floridas will break off into their own independent league. We can do it better than what they're offering us and what the umbrella of the USPHL does. I don't know of any situation out there. I'm not saying that. There's no situation out there. I'm just saying I've seen it happen before, where you get these super leagues and then they splinter and they break up again. So I think that's really where you're going to see most change, not with the NUL and the USHL. They've got a great relationship, but I think you're really going to see it splinter in that USPHL level. EHL might have some influence on that. You never know. The NA3HL might have some influence on that by picking up teams and making more logical choices on where the USPHL model is at from where it's at right now. So let's get another question here. On average, how much does one have to pay to play in the NUL? Get that, Mike?
You should get that. You actually had a son that played in the NUL.
Oh, it's simple. Sticks are free. Equipment's free. You pay for your billeting. So billeting, what is it, $400 maybe, $350, $400. I think that It's capped by USA Hockey. But so you're going to pay some incidentals. Incidentals meaning you're gonna want more food, or you're not gonna want to go home every night and eat with the billet family. So you're gonna get Chipotle with your buddies. You're gonna go out on Saturday and get something to eat when you don't have a game, or Sunday you might go out with breakfast with 3 or 4 guys on the team. So you're gonna need a couple $100 extra a month for incidentals, but you're paying your billet fees. You pretty much don't have to worry about anything except for skates and your internals, your shoulder pads, your elbow pads, your shin pads. But they're giving you helmets, they're giving you gloves, they're giving you sticks. So you really are taken care of well in the the USHL and the North American Hockey League. There's no other league that does it. Now, you might want to upgrade your sticks. The team buys an unbranded stick, meaning it's still the quality brand, and it's still Bauer, isn't it? Did they change this year?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Whatever the brand is, it's going to be Bauer CCM. But I think it's still with Bauer right now. You're going to get an unbranded stick. They have the same patterns. You get your own custom pattern. You order them. They come in 10 or 12 sticks. The team will, they'll dole them out to you when you need them. So most kids have 3 sticks at a time. And, the stick that's getting battered, they use in practice. They keep a nice one for games, and they might keep their nicest one for the power play. So, but you're going to be, if you get in the null, you're going to be fine. You're going to feel like, in many cases, you're going to feel like a pro. You're going to travel better than you do at the tier 3 level. You're going to be, you're fed better. The hotels are better. And for the most part, a lot of places that are in the league, you're going to have really nice crowds. You play up in Maine, you're going to have nice crowds. You play in Johnstown, you're going to have an unbelievable experience. Not talking about the team, but the fan base, what's going on with the fans. You play in the South, most of the South teams have really big crowds and really good rivalries. And get used to one thing, though. This is one thing if you play in the Null, especially in the South. They love to throw things on the ice when goals are scored. I mean, just love it. It doesn't matter what team's playing. Shreveport throws little crawdaddy things on the ice. What is it in the Brahmas? They throw the red balls?
No, they're like bowls, like rubber bowls.
That's right. That's right. Amarillo throws the red balls. So, but they just all toss crap on the ice after every goal. And here's the thing that drives me nuts, because this is what slows everything down. They send 4-year-olds out to pick it all up. So 4-year-olds pushing a bucket around, barely able to stand up and picking one up at a time. So if a goal is scored at one of those big games and there's 500 of those things flying on the ice, go get your beer then, because you got plenty of time before the face-off comes again. All right. Let's see. One last question, Mike. You want to do one more?
Yeah, let's do it.
Which one is more physical, the Null or the USHL?
It's not even close. I'm not even sure the USHL checks. The Null is way heavier and more physical and tighter spaces. The USHL, those kids are so skilled from line 1 through 4 that, throwing bodies around and even really board battles and things like that, you just don't see it a lot. They're just flying up and down the ice, making plays, and honestly, I wish there were more physical play in that league, because in many cases they're going to need it when they get to college, because they're not all going to be the highest level players on their team. So there's really no comparison from a physical standpoint.
Fully agree. All right, folks. I think we killed everything. Mike, what do you think? Do you think we got everything covered that we wanted to cover tonight?
Yeah, this was a good conversation. And what's the theme here again with goalies before we leave?
Patience, just a little patience. Right? Did I kill that? Did I kill that song?
I think we got to go after that.
Oh, come on! It's not that bad.
Well, it's not that good. That's the problem.
Why do you got to be like that?
It just, I don't know if your ears are working, but I wasn't sure that was good singing or humming.
All right. Hey, listen, everybody. Thanks so much for coming on tonight and sticking with us. Wednesday night, we do Junior Hockey Live, where we talk about individual teams, coaches, players, and leagues. We get into more detail. We don't talk about the ladder up and how to navigate all the different areas. Love to see you on Wednesday night. We don't give it a certain time because somebody can never give me a solid time on Wednesday because he's got to go to practice. These assistant coaches are not trained well enough by the head coach to run things when he's not around. Now, if he delegated and put a little grind on that team, he'd be there on time and we could give you a time, but we can't. So, Mike, what time are we going to go on Wednesday?
We'll be at our normal time.
What is our normal time? I don't even know myself.
5 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
All right, 6 o'clock on Wednesday. We're doing it. And, folks, we really need help. If you could, go to our YouTube page, Junior Hockey Advisor. Please subscribe. We're getting really close. We've had a great run over the last few weeks of new subscriptions. But we'd love to have you in the family. We're going to eventually just post our videos on the YouTube sites. We're not there yet, but we're going to start pulling it away from Facebook and only using Facebook for the discussion. So please, if you can, go back and subscribe to that. That would really help us out a lot. And that's it, Mike.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you having me on.
Having you on, it's like a bad rash. You're always around.
Now listen, I want all of our friends and family to share this on Instagram and TikTok.